On the 13th of October, 1917, approximately 70,000 people stood in the rain in a muddy meadow called the Cova da Iria, near the small Portuguese hill village of Fatima, 80 miles north of Lisbon. They had been arriving since the previous afternoon, on foot, on donkey, by ox cart, by motor car from Lisbon and Porto and from across the Spanish border. They had come because 3 shepherd children, the oldest of them 10 years old, had told them a miracle would happen at that exact place. On that exact day, at noon. Among the crowd were farmers, parish priests, soldiers on leave, anti-clerical Republican officials sent to document what they expected would be the public collapse of a fraud, and journalists from Lisbon's most prominent newspapers, several of which had spent the previous 5 months mocking the Fatima visionaries in print. The 3 children were Lucia dos Santos, who was 10 years old, and her cousins Francisco Marto, who was 9, and Jacinta Marto, who was 7. They had been tending sheep in the Cova da Iria on the 13th of May, 1917, when they reported the first of 6 apparitions of a young woman in white whom they identified as the Virgin Mary. They reported seeing her again on the 13th of June, of July, of August, of September, and finally of October. On the 13th of July, according to the children, the apparition promised that a public miracle would happen on the 13th of October so that, in her reported words, all might believe. The children told everyone. The story spread by foot and rumor through rural Portugal. By the morning of the 13th of October, the meadow was full. The journalist Avelino de Almeida, chief editor of the Lisbon anti-clerical newspaper O Século, stood in the rain at the edge of the crowd. Earlier that month, he had published a satirical piece mocking what he expected to be the inevitable failure. He was there to write its sequel. The rain was heavy. The ground was thick with mud. The crowd's umbrellas were useless. According to the contemporary witness statements gathered by Father Manuel Nunes Formigão, a Catholic theologian who began collecting depositions the same week, several thousand people in the crowd had walked through the night to be present. Most expected nothing. Some expected something. None of the eyewitness accounts, hostile or sympathetic, suggested they expected what they reported having seen. Witnessed. Documented miracles. Every week. If you want next week's, subscribe. At a few minutes past noon, by the testimony of Lucia, of Avelino de Almeida in O Século 2 days later, of Father Joaquim de Almeida, no relation writing in Ordem on the 17th of October, and of several thousand individual witness statements collected over the following decades, the rain stopped. Lucia called out to the crowd to look at the sun. The clouds parted. The sun appeared to spin on its axis. It threw off bands of colored light that swept across the landscape and the faces of the crowd. After a brief pause, it appeared to plunge toward the earth. The crowd fell to its knees. Several thousand cried out in terror. After roughly 10 minutes, the sun returned to its normal position. The crowd's clothes, soaked through after a night of rain, were reportedly dry. Avelino de Almeida published his eyewitness account on the front page of O Século on the 15th of October. He did not convert. He reported what he had seen. Independent eyewitness reports came in over the following weeks from observers as far as 18 kilometers from the Cova da Iria, who had no knowledge that anything had been predicted at Fatima. The diocesan bishop of Leiria, José Alves Correia da Silva, opened a formal canonical inquiry in 1922. It collected over 1,500 individual depositions over the next 8 years. On the 13th of October 1930, after consulting the Canonical Commission's findings, Bishop da Silva formally declared the apparitions to the 3 children worthy of belief and authorized public devotion at Fatima. Francisco Marto and Jacinta Marto, the 2 younger cousins, had both died of the Spanish flu pandemic by 1920. Lucia dos Santos lived to 2005 as a Carmelite nun at the convent of Coimbra. She wrote 4 published memoirs. The Sanctuary of Our Lady of Fatima, built on the site of the apparitions, receives approximately 6 million pilgrims a year today. The Cova da Iria, where the 70,000 stood in the mud, is preserved as an open-air shrine. On the 13th of every May and the 13th of every October, the anniversary of the first and last apparition, the crowds return. The spot in the field is marked. You can walk to it. Witnessed. Documented. Inexplicable.